Kenya Electricity Generating Company PLC, commonly called Kengen, has delayed the release of its audited financial results for the year ended 30th of June 2020. The firm's company secretary and legal affairs director, Paul Ndungi, says the Capital Markets Authority is aware of the delay and has already granted them approval. Kengen was supposed to have released their financial results by the 15th of December, but the CMA has allowed it to file and publish the statements by the 31st of January 2021. The utility company's 68th annual general meeting has also been postponed. He added, and that is of course the company secretary, that further we will also not be in a position to convene the company's 68th annual general meeting for the year ending 30th of June 2020 by 31st of December 2020 as required by the Companies Act number 17 of 2015. The company's profit after tax declined to 7.88 billion Kenyan shillings for the year which ended June 30th, 2019. However, the company's energy sales grew from 7,989 gigahertz in 2018 to 8,277, despite dilution of the market share following new entrants, mostly in alternative energy. Kengen's total revenue grew from 45.30 billion Kenyan shillings in 2018 to 45.97 billion Kenyan shillings in 2019, leading to a 1.5% growth. Kengen's other income increased from 275 million Kenyan shillings to 619 million Kenyan shillings, mainly as a result of consultancy services, insurance compensation, and tax refunds. Now joining me, I have James Mbugua. He is a legal and finance communications expert from Kenya. Thank you so much for joining me, James.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, so do we need to make a big deal out of Kengen delaying the release of their reports, even though they knew there was a deadline and they knew that according to the law, this is always the deadline? So before we get into what could be accounting for it, is it such a big deal?
No, it's not necessarily. It's not such a big deal. At least from a general perspective, it is not such a big deal. For shareholders, it might raise eyebrows, but generally, the last 2 years, particularly, we have seen quite a bit of profit warnings and sometimes a bit of delays here and there. But I think with the assurance that the regulator has given them some extension, we should be fine.
Okay, so now what do we know is accounting for the delay this time with Kengen's audited report?
Mostly I would attribute it to, obviously, before we say anything else, we have to talk about the COVID. We have to talk about the COVID-19 effect on things. And then we also have to talk about the fact that the utility, in this sense, the company that actually sells power to retailers, that is Kenya Power and Lighting, has been suffering immensely. They owe Kengen quite a lot of money. That issue is supposed to be sorted out by the government and the regulators. So I would imagine that that has also played a part in perhaps clouding the sort of clarity that Kengen would like to communicate to its shareholders.
CEO Rebecca Maino was confirmed just a few months ago. Could we be seeing some boardroom tussle, some boardroom issues? She's a bit new to the position. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not aware of any boardroom battles or intrigues. Rebecca Maino, yes, has been confirmed. She's one of the few female CEOs of listed companies in the country. The only issue is that, well, and also before that, she was actually the company secretary. So she's really an insider. I do not expect that there are any sort of boardroom tussles. What I might not know is whether she is working well with some of the contractors that they may have for projects that probably were procured before her time. But otherwise, I have not heard any sort of murmurs or rumors coming from Kengen about that.
Just note that the two companies that sort of make up Kengen are among close to 150 state corporations that face delays in the signing off of their financial audits and results following a vacuum in the Auditor General's office between August last year and June this year. President Uhuru Kenyatta's nominee, Janet Gathungu, took office in July, almost 1 year since her predecessor left in August of 2019. So let's quickly talk about that. 1 year. Almost 1 year to name an Auditor General. So this has affected not just Kengen, but also affected about 150 something public corporations or public entities. What's going on in regards to that? So the new Auditor General is settling in. So it's easier, of course, for everyone to say, oh, this is the reason why there might be some delays. Is there politics that's coming into play, not particularly for Kengen, but in this area involving the Auditor General?
Obviously, politics has played quite a bit of played quite a part in it. But the issue is that because of also credibility issues and accountability issues that we've had in the past, the post of the Auditor General has always had independence, and therefore the holder typically does not have to really kowtow to the political whims of whoever is in power at that time. Now, the previous Auditor General really gave the government a hard time, and they really also, even Parliament tried to get him out, but they were unable. But the thing is that even now, because of that, and because of the power that the Auditor General holds, even when there is a vacancy, it is not easy for anybody in the office to just sign off on audited reports. So the substantive holder of the office has to be in place, and that is why there was this delay. Obviously, state corporations, a lot of them, their reports will be delayed, but the ones that should worry people perhaps would be the ones that are also somewhat privately held, like Kenya Power, Kengen, and the likes, because those also have to be accountable to shareholders.
Okay, so we know that total revenue has grown. We also know that Kengen's other income increased as well. They've diversified power generation and have also kept up with some changes in technology. So do you think that Kengen is on the right track, and can they maintain what seems to be a positive growth trajectory?
Well, I do think so. I have seen that in the recent past, they have actually issued expressions of interest notices and requests for proposals for some other power generation projects, especially geothermal, that they would want to get into. I know they're also trying to get into the renewable energy space. I also know that they have there's a plan there by the government to put up an industrial park in a place called Naivasha in the Rift Valley. And basically the concept behind this is that there's a lot of geothermal power that Kengen generates in that area, and industries could be attracted to that area so that they can be directly fed cheap power from there. So there are quite a number of good things to think about, Kengen. In the short term, the only concern would be one I have already mentioned, that Kenya Power has had delays in paying for the power it offtakes from Kengen. Number two, perhaps there might be subdued demand because of reduced economic activities, industries that are probably not operating at the optimal level. So that again may see the demand for power be a bit dimmed. But in the medium to long term, given the right management, I would expect them to be a good company to bet on.
Okay, you touched a bit on my final question on this, and this is around predictions, saying, of course, that because of the economic downturn caused by coronavirus, there might be lesser use of power for them to get some revenue on. So the full year report for last year showed that net profit dipped marginally from 7.891 billion Kenyan shillings to 7.884 billion Kenyan shillings on higher operating costs for the company. Now, most company results have shown few profits. It's been a very difficult year, lapping into this from last year's financial year to this year's financial year. Do you have any predictions as to what we could be expecting from Kengen come January 2021 when they finally do release their audited reports?
Well, I couldn't I couldn't say for sure. Sure, but obviously, given what we've seen from Kenya Power as well, I would expect probably flatline growth, perhaps maybe a reduction in profitability, depending on whether part of the sales, as you know in accounting, that a sale is recognized as soon as it's made in the books, but generally, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the money has been received. So it could be that they may report that they have sold this amount of power, but they actually have not received the money. So it may not reflect if we apply mark to market, or the IFRS principles, where you actually have to put in the actual amount of money that you do have in the bank. So I would expect them to either flatline or perhaps a reduction, but that should be made up perhaps when Kenya Power settles its dues, and perhaps also when the economy picks up. I mean, short term, I definitely do see that there will be a slight dip.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick pause on this conversation. When we come back, we'll get into matters of compensation. Boeing to pay 327 million Kenyan shillings to Kenyan families of Ethiopian Airline crash. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Now, an out-of-court settlement has been reached between a Kenyan family of a victim of the 2019 Ethiopian Airline crash and American aircraft maker Boeing for 327 million Kenyan shillings. This is the first settlement in a case by Rebek Law Chartered, which sued Boeing for about 109 billion shillings on behalf of some families who lost their loved ones in the crash on Ethiopian Airline 737 MAX in 2019. All 149 people on board were killed. The U.S. law firm filed a dozen of these suits against the aircraft maker in a U.S. federal court in Chicago in the aftermath of two fatal crashes involving the same Boeing model plane, the Boeing 737 MAX. Some of the Rebek Law Chartered remaining cases from the Boeing 737 MAX 8 crash of Lion Air Flight 610 that have not reached settlement will be either tried in the U.S. or Indonesia. If tried in Indonesia, a criminal case against Boeing's officers and its board of directors would be filed. The Nairobi-bound flight crashed shortly after takeoff from Addis Ababa's Bole International Airports, killing 149 on board, which included 32 Kenyans, 18 Canadians, of which 2 were of Nigerian descent, 9 Ethiopians, 8 Italians, 8 Chinese, 8 Americans, 7 Britons, 7 French citizens, 6 Egyptians, 5 Germans, 4 Indians, and 4 people from Slovakia. So James is still with me as we get into the details of this conversation. Compensation. The case of Boeing versus the families of the victims has been in court for some time. Do such class actions, in your opinion and with your experience, stay this long in court, or do they take longer? Because this crash did happen in 2019 and we're in 2020, and at least one of the families now has reached some sort of settlement. What do you think?
Well, typically, I think this was expeditiously done. Typically, these cases do take quite a bit of time, and especially when you are going up against a corporate behemoth like Boeing. Quite a number of times, Boeing has had crashes on the African continent. Typically, those end up being that either it was a pilot error or maybe some other explanation that really exculpates Boeing and the airlines from any sort of responsibility. But this matter was taken up by the U.S. authorities. Boeing apparently had been warned about some of these issues that were showing up on the 737 MAX. And even they later admitted, or even insiders, that some shortcuts were taken. So this was a long time coming. Perhaps it was not even the amount of settlement. Perhaps it was, or rather, it was not about whether there would be a settlement. It was whether, what amount would be settled.
Yeah, very interesting that you say not about whether there'd be a settlement, but about the terms or the amounts of the settlement. So before we get into the amounts, I just quickly want to ask, what do you think would have been different if this case had been heard in Kenya? You mentioned when you first answered the question that we've seen some of these crashes happen on the continent, and we don't always hear about the families getting compensation versus maybe if it happened somewhere in Europe and how it's addressed and the consequences follow. But how do you think, what difference would it have made if this was a case that was being handled strictly and simply inside Kenyan territory?
I would have explained. First of all, I would have. I don't know whether the case would even have taken off against Boeing. They tend to have these, crash sites. They typically send engineers very quickly on the ground. The black boxes are taken. And then they go and check them out and then come give back their analysis. And typically the answer is that it was a pilot error or some other maintenance stuff and was not done. So really that removes them, and any sort of evidence that you would be able to bring in court against them is not there. Ethiopia, you may remember, was very adamant. They actually went to the ground, took the black box and insisted it would not be given to Boeing, it would be taken to France, independently verified. And this perhaps has brought the difference. Now, because of the precedents, perhaps going forward, we may see the Boeing taking up much more responsibility and even product liability. But typically, if this case was here, the airline perhaps being domiciled either here or in Ethiopia would have been perhaps forced to compensate the victims. But it would have taken quite a bit of time, I would imagine.
Okay, so there were 32 Kenyans on board the flight, and initially the law firm in the U.S. was asking for $109 billion. This family has received $327 million. It's difficult to put an amount to the value of a human life and how much someone may help their family or others in their lifetime. So let's start first with the 327 million Kenyan shilling compensation. What do you think about that amount? Do you think it's fair?
Well, like you say, I mean, it's pretty hard to put an amount to somebody's life, really. But at least from common law and practice and precedents that has been set by previous judgments in court, there does seem to be some method and some formula to it. And when you're looking at damages that are being paid or this sort of compensation, there is perhaps you even look at the potential of the person, how they were, what kind of work they were doing, who were they taking care of, and perhaps what was their lifetime earning potential and all that. So I am not quite familiar with what this gentleman was doing, but what I would say is that that amount of money in this country would go quite a long way. I think if you plan yourself in the right way, certainly would take care of any education of any children that they had, probably even put them up in a nice house and that they own. But like you say, you cannot replace the loss. But overall, I would say it's not a bad amount.
Okay, so we know that Boeing has cleared the aircraft to resume flight operations. We also know other cases against Boeing will be heard in court soon. What do you anticipate? Lengthy trials, or will Boeing try to settle out of court so this is not dragged out and bad publicity and things are back linked to them? And do you think each family may receive up to the amounts that this family got, 327 million Kenyan shillings?
First of all, yes, I would imagine that Boeing for the aircraft to be cleared to fly by the FAA, it definitely means that the FAA has been on the ground with its technicians. They have actually looked at the fleet, those planes, made sure that the issues that were troubling the plane have been sorted out. As far as going forward, I would imagine also that the company would look to probably in negotiations between its lawyers and the lawyers representing the victims or the victims' families, and try and come to a settlement, at least on that score. I do not know whether the FAA itself has sued them, because then they would be subject to a really heavy fine. What I do know is that the Boeing would look to get this issue sorted out as quickly as possible. The order book has been suffering. It hasn't been helped actually by the fact that even under the COVID pandemic, the airline travel has also been quite low. So they will definitely look to resolve this matter one way or the other, and I expect probably they will look to settle.
Thank you so much, James Mbugua, legal and finance communications expert in Nairobi, in Kenya. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Edge.
Thank you very much.
All right, and we're going straight into NT4 to watch as we speed race our way to the end of this edition of the show. African Development Bank secures nearly $90 million in new funding towards sustainable energy in Africa. IATA exposes public enterprises lie about SAA pilots' pay. Bitcoin surpasses $20,000 mark to hit a new all-time high. And oil and power firms owe Nigerian banks 5.83 trillion naira, and that's according to the NBS. And that's all on this edition of Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget you can head to our website, follow us on our social media accounts at News Central TV, and you can also catch up with our news and programs on the go by downloading the News Central TV mobile app on Play Store and iOS. Until next time, I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun.